Hi, I'm Nate Seberg. This is One Day Ahead. Welcome to One Day Ahead, Great Gatsby Chapter 2. This is a web series for those teachers and students just trying to stay a day ahead of the class. So whether this is just the second time you've been drunk ever, or if you feel just as good on nothing at all. Either way, I offer my thoughts on this American classic and my approach for teaching it. This video's got 3 segments: a chapter summary, a look at the motivations of a character, advice specifically for teachers. If you're one of those educators, I got a unit. It's got a lot of teachery stuff in there. It's aligned with the Common Core and it's synced up with everything I'm gonna be talking about here. It's like the next month of your life. Go check it out. The link's in the thing. If you're just here for a refresher or new ideas, that's great, welcome. If you feel up to doing a little clicking, support this channel by subscribing to it. All right, let's go to the summary. So chapter 2 opens with our boy Nick talking about the Valley of Ashes. It's a charming little spot between New York and the Eggs. As its name suggests, it's a place where ashes take the form of houses and chimneys and rising smoke, and finally with the transcendent effort of men who move dimly and already crumbling through the powdery air. So that's lovely. The ashes are a byproduct presumably of New York City, and on an abstract level, Fitzgerald introduces this place to show that the booming fever pace of the 1920s, with its forgotten morals and uninhibited quest for money, has a hidden but very real cost. So only the eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg see this injustice. They're actually eyes on an old faded billboard that overlook the valley, and they see everything and they watch unblinkingly. So in case you are missing the very subtle symbolism here, TJ's eyes represent the eyes of God. And as far as symbols goes, this one's a little on the nose. We quickly discover that Tom and Nick are taking the train to New York. Nick to take in the city and Tom to, I don't know, kick children. However, as they stop at the bridge in the Valley of Ashes, Tom grabs Nick by the elbow and quite literally forces him off the train. They're going to go meet Tom's mistress, Myrtle, but they first run into her husband, the anemic but painfully honest Wilson. He owns a garage and he thinks he is this close to buying a car off Tom. Nick describes Myrtle as having an immediately perceptible vitality about her, as if the nerves of her body were continually smoldering. They get Wilson out of the room and they make a plan to get Myrtle to New York. All the while, Nick just stands there stupidly. Next thing you know, they've met up in the city, and after stopping to buy Myrtle a dog, they head to Tom's city apartment so that Tom and Myrtle can, Nick wants to leave because, who wouldn't? But they peer pressure him into staying by calling up some friends for a party. It turns out it's just people getting drunk, there's a difference, but there it is. Of the friends, the only 2 that matter are Myrtle's sister, Catherine, and a man named Chester McKee. Nick says Mr. McKee was a pale, feminine man from the flat that's an apartment below. He informed me that he was in the artistic game, and I gathered later that he was a photographer. So for those of you keeping score, Nick just described him as being a rather effeminate man with artistic sensibilities. Folks, this is 1920s code for homosexuality. McKee is a photographer, and since portraits required a great deal of planning and care, they're often referred to and are referred to here as studies. They're considered art at the time, and so they have names and things. They talk about studies at the party, and you'll be lost for 3 pages if you don't know this. And speaking of the party, it sucks. Whiskey keeps going around the room, and Nick partakes heavily, writing, "I have been drunk just twice in my life, and the second time was that afternoon." So everything that happens has a dim haze cast over it. The only exception is Catherine, who says she feels just as good on nothing at all. During the course of the party, we learn how Tom and Myrtle met. It's boring. We also learn the only reason Tom and Myrtle can't get married right away is Tom claims Daisy is Catholic and then can't get a divorce. This, of course, is a lie, because Tom, of course, is a dumpster fire. As the evening drags on, something strange happens to Nick. He writes, "I wanted to get out and walk eastward toward the park through the soft twilight, but each time I tried to go, I became entangled in some wild, strident argument. Yet high over the city, our line of yellow windows must have contributed their share of human secrecy to the casual watcher in the darkening streets. And I was him, too, looking up and wondering. I was within and without." At some point around midnight, the wheels finally come off. Nick writes, "Tom Buchanan and Mrs. Wilson," that's Myrtle, "stood face to face, discussing in impassioned voices whether Mrs. Wilson, still Myrtle, had any right to mention Daisy's name. 'Daisy, Daisy, Daisy,' shouted Miss Wilson. 'I'll say it whenever I want to. Daisy, Daisy,' making a short, deft movement. Tom Buchanan broke her nose with his open hand. Chester had been dozing in a chair, but the chaos that follows this move is enough to wake him up, and he sees the blood and screaming as his cue to go to bed. And Nick, well, to understand what happens next, we need to move to our next segment. So each episode, we dive deeper into a major theme of the chapter by exploring the inner motivations of a character, which is why this week's person of interest is Nick Carraway, and the theme is the lies we tell ourselves. Nick, buddy, am I sure I can trust you? Listen, man, this whole story is being told through your eyes. Everything I'm reading here is simply and exclusively your recorded recollection. And I'm down with that. But if you start giving me reasons to doubt your word, like take this declaration: I have been drunk just twice in my life. And the second time was that afternoon. So, like, spoiler alert, but you get drunk again next chapter. And if you think about it, if this was the second time, and you get drunk again, and the you writing it has lived through all of these events already, what I'm saying, Nick, is that you're full of shit. Okay, listen, right, that just might be an accounting error. You forgot to, carry the 9 or whatever. But it's your passivity, Nick, that has me worried. Everyone's always pushing you around. Tom forces you off the train. When you're at his house, he steers you all around. You try to leave this party 11 times in this chapter, but you never quite make it to the door. You kind of remind me of one of these things. No backbone. In chapter 1, you have all these thundering internal opinions about how your cousin Daisy should stick up for herself. But when you get her alone, you say 3 things, none of them interesting, and one about her daughter was, and I quote, I suppose she talks and eats and everything. Ugh. As a total aside, having seen the Baz Luhrmann movie, I so associate you, Nick, with the actor Tobey Maguire that I can't read about you trying to slip out of a party in downtown New York without thinking, just jump out the window, Spider-Man. But let's really get to the crux of it here, Nick. When Chester leaves the party, you exit with him. In the elevator, with the elevator operator standing there, he invites you to lunch sometime. Then we get something very interesting. We get ... So it's actually called an ellipse, but whatever. That's how the kids say it, and I'm down with the kids. I've seen a meme. So ... That's international sign for I've left something out. What'd you leave out there, Nick? Following the elevator scene, we get a cryptic fragment. ... I was standing beside his bed, and he was sitting up between the sheets, clad in his underwear, with a great portfolio in his hands. Beauty and the Beast, Loneliness, Old Grocery Horse, Brooklyn Bridge. Those are the names of Chester's studies, aren't they? And it's Chester sitting up in bed. Nick, I get that it's 1920s America, that you can't live openly as a gay or bisexual man. I get that. But my concern isn't that you're lying to us. It's that you might be lying to yourself. If you cannot be honest about something as foundational as your sexuality, if you need to speak in half-truths and riddles, if you need to fracture your life into being within and without, if you need to hedge your bets by saying you were drunk so everything that happened had a dim haze cast over it, then how can we trust that the story you're telling us is even true? Now add this. The central character of this story, Gatsby, is someone you already described using the word gorgeous on the second page of the book. I feel for you, Nick. I wish you could just be you. But man, if this story is going to end up with you hating everyone from the East, except for this one guy who you call gorgeous, who just happens to be a gajillionaire, well, you're going to need to forgive me if I take your account with a grain or a barrel of salt. With love, Nate. So this book is complex. It's a thin little volume, but there is so much packed into so little that for a teacher, it can be hard to know what to aim at. That's why I'm here. Teachers, let me give you my take. This chapter aims students squarely at Nick. If the schedule works out and you have kids who will read, have them finish chapter 2 before they come in on their own. I do that because I want them to read the end of the chapter on their own with Nick's sexual encounter and have them totally miss it. In my experience, almost all of them blaze right past this. And the few kids who thought something was up are either too uncomfortable or not sure enough to suggest something so scandalous. So you gotta be ready. Begin the lesson with an entry task. What does ... mean? We boil it down to, I skipped something here. From there, after students engage in the regular, scaffolded, student-driven, awesome activities linked below, we discuss the chapter, noting all the places Nick is exhibiting low power or a lack of agency. When McKee shows up, you're going to need to translate artistic game and feminine man into 1920s code for homosexual, and you will need to define studies as artistic portraits that are often named because it helps with the end. I always elicited the intimacy of Nick wiping off the shaving cream and the brutality of Tom hitting Myrtle. Not that the kids need more of a reason to hate Tom, but there it is. The end of this chapter is this week's If You Only Hit One Thing. The reveal here is really important, and it's also kind of a delicate thing. You are steering everyone to a revelation that will create a reaction in your class. Like, it's sex, it's scandalous, it's adult, it's an encounter between two men, and you almost certainly have LGBT students in your class, like openly or not. So it's worth thinking through. I'm careful to frame the revelation not as, oh my God, Nick is gay, but instead as Nick had a full-fledged sexual encounter and you didn't notice. I also explicitly validate that Nick can have sex with whomever he wants and direct the discussion instead toward why he obfuscates, like why he more or less lies here. Speaking of the lie, it can really be read in two ways. One, Nick is gay, but it's 1920, so he can't just come out and tell us. Or two, Nick cannot quite be honest with himself. He wants to tell, but he can't quite bring himself to do it. Both are reasonable takes, but I choose the latter because, frankly, I get so much more mileage out of it. Now we can get into this reliable narrator territory, and I ride that train all the way to the end of the book. Finally, and I love this, as I'm leading kids to the revelation, prodding them closer and closer, inevitably, I get one kid who figures it out and blurts it out before the rest. And while the other students are like dashing to their books and teetering on the edge, trying to decide if they agree, ask them, when Mr. McKee invites Nick to lunch, what's he physically doing in the elevator? Come to lunch someday, he suggests, as we groan down in the elevator. Where? Anywhere. Keep your hands off the lever, snapped the elevator boy. And that's chapter 2. Don't forget to subscribe and to check out my unit by following the link below. Next time, we head to chapter 3, where Nick gets drunk, again. We learn that books have pages, and Gatsby's smile launches 1,000 memes. Memes? Memes. It's memes. All that and more next time on One Day Ahead.